ever sat in a theater, gripping your seat, heart pounding, telling yourself, it's just a movie, only to feel like something is watching you? Some horror films push people way beyond their limits, so terrifying that audiences ran out of the theater, some in tears, others literally throwing up. Today we're diving into 10 horror movies so scary, people walked out of theaters. Think you can handle it? They say some movies go beyond horror. They don't just scare you, they get inside your head. They make your skin crawl, your stomach turn, and your pulse race until you can't take it anymore. People didn't just scream at these films, they ran, some in tears, others collapsing in the aisles. Some even needed medical attention. The Exorcist, 1973. This one needs no introduction. When The Exorcist hit theaters in 1973, people freaked out. Some fainted, others threw up, and theaters even handed out barf bags because of how disturbing it was. The demonic possession, the head spinning, the pea soup vomit, it was too much for many viewers. What made The Exorcist so horrifying was its combination of psychological terror and grotesque imagery. Regan's transformation from an innocent girl into a foul-mouthed, grotesquely possessed entity was deeply unsettling. Scenes such as the infamous head-spinning moment, the violent convulsions, the levitation, and the disturbing use of religious imagery pushed boundaries like never before. Adding to the fear factor was the eerie real-life history surrounding the film. Many believe that The Exorcist was cursed, as multiple strange incidents occurred during production. A fire destroyed part of the set, actors reported unexplained injuries, and several crew members, including cast members' family members, died under mysterious circumstances. Despite the fear and controversy, The Exorcist became a massive success, earning over $440 million worldwide and receiving 10 Academy Award nominations, a rare achievement for a horror film. It remains one of the most terrifying and influential horror movies of all time, continuing to haunt audiences decades after its release. Hereditary, 2018, modern horror at its finest. Hereditary isn't just scary, it's deeply unsettling. Audiences didn't just scream, they sat in shocked silence or left the theater completely shaken. The film's slow-burning dread, eerie performances, and that horrifying car scene, you know the one, made many walk out, unable to handle its disturbing realism. Hereditary is often regarded as one of the most unsettling horror films of the 21st century. Directed by Ari Aster in his feature debut, the film tells the story of a grieving family tormented by dark secrets, supernatural forces, and psychological horror that lingers long after the credits roll. As Hereditary progresses, it descends into full-blown supernatural horror with chilling imagery, disturbing rituals, and a finale that left many viewers shaken. Some audience members reportedly left the theater before the film's climax, overwhelmed by the intense psychological horror and grotesque visuals. Beyond the scares, Hereditary is a deep exploration of family trauma, mental illness, and the inescapable nature of fate. Its ability to blend psychological and supernatural horror makes it one of the most effective and harrowing horror films of the modern era. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. When the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was released in 1974, it shocked audiences unlike anything before it. Directed by Tobe Hooper, the film follows a group of friends who encounter a family of cannibalistic killers in rural Texas, led by the now iconic Leatherface. This isn't just a movie, it feels like a real-life nightmare. When the Texas Chainsaw Massacre premiered, people ran out of theaters traumatized by its gritty documentary-style violence. The brutality felt too real, and audiences in the 70s had never seen anything so disturbing before. Some even claimed it gave them PTSD. What set this film apart was its raw, unrelenting intensity. Unlike the stylized horror films of the time, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre felt disturbingly real. Hooper's use of a documentary-style approach, gritty cinematography, and a near-constant sense of dread made the experience almost unbearable for some viewers. Many left theaters in shock, unable to handle the visceral terror and brutality depicted on screen. Despite its title, the film contains little blood compared to later horror movies, but its psychological horror and relentless tension made it feel far more violent than it actually was. The eerie sun-drenched setting, the disturbing sound design, and the maniacal, almost surreal energy of the film's climax left a lasting impact on those who watched it. Raw, 2016. Raw is one of the most intense and disturbing horror films of the past decade. Directed by Julia Ducournau, this French-Belgian horror drama tells the story of Justine, a bright and innocent vegetarian who begins her first year of veterinary school. What starts as a strict academic environment quickly descends into a chaotic and brutal initiation process, pushing her to break her lifelong dietary restrictions. After being forced to eat raw meat for the first time, something inside her changes, and she develops an insatiable hunger for human flesh. This French horror flick is not for the weak. Raw tells the story of a vegetarian girl who develops a hunger for human flesh. Audiences in Cannes and TIFF literally passed out, and some had to be carried out by medics. EMTs were called because people couldn't handle the graphic cannibal scene. The film is a psychological and body horror masterpiece, blending coming-of-age themes with deeply unsettling imagery. The transformation Justine undergoes is both physical and emotional, and as her cravings intensify, the film takes viewers into grotesque, visceral territory. The realistic depictions of cannibalism, gore, and self-mutilation are so intense that they triggered extreme reactions from audiences. The Blair Witch Project, 1999. When The Blair Witch Project was released in 1999, it changed horror forever. Directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, the film was one of the first major found footage horror films, using a raw handheld camera style that made it feel disturbingly real. Not your usual horror flick. This one messed with people's minds. Filmed like a real-life documentary, The Blair Witch Project made people so dizzy and paranoid that theaters had to issue motion sickness warnings. Some thought it was actually real and walked out, too scared to find out how it ended. Film's horror doesn't rely on gore or traditional jump scares. Instead, it builds paranoia, dread, and psychological terror, making audiences feel like they were right there in the woods with them. What made The Blair Witch Project so effective was its brilliant marketing campaign. The filmmakers sold it as a real documentary, releasing fake news reports, missing person posters, and a website that convinced many people that the footage was authentic. Some viewers genuinely believed the actors had disappeared, adding to the film's urban legend-like mystique. The Witch, 2015. The Witch, also stylized as The Vevitch, is a slow-burning, deeply unsettling horror film that thrives on psychological terror rather than traditional jump scares. Directed by Robert Eggers in his feature debut, the film is a meticulously crafted period piece, set in 1630s New England, long before the infamous Salem witch trials. Its historical accuracy, eerie cinematography, and creeping dread make it one of the most unique and disturbing horror films in recent years. This slow-burning psychological nightmare made audiences feel deeply uncomfortable. The historical accuracy, the disturbing atmosphere, and the goat from hell, Black Phillip, created a film so eerie that many couldn't take it. People stormed out saying it was too creepy and unbearably disturbing, though divisive. Upon release, The Witch has since gained a cult following and is now considered one of the most intelligent and terrifying psychological horror films of the 21st century. It paved the way for elevated horror, a movement that includes films like Hereditary, The Lighthouse, and Midsommar, which prioritize deep storytelling, unsettling atmosphere, and emotional horror over cheap thrills. For those who can sit through its slow-burning dread, The Witch is an unforgettable experience, one that lingers in the mind long after the screen fades to black. Antrim, 2018, The Cursed Film. The deadliest film ever made isn't just a horror movie, it's a legend wrapped in mystery and fear. Marketed as a lost 1970s film that had been banned due to its supposedly deadly effects, Antrim has an unsettling reputation for being cursed. According to urban legend, those who watch it may experience misfortune, illness, or even death. While this might sound like a marketing stunt, the eerie stories surrounding the film have convinced many that it's not worth the risk. Festivals reported strange occurrences, and some people refused to stay in their seats. The legend states that Antrim was originally screened in Budapest in 1988, but after the showing, the entire theater burned down, killing several audience members. The film then disappeared, only to resurface decades later. The film is presented as a documentary about a lost film from the 1970s, with the main portion being the supposedly cursed movie itself. The story follows a young boy and his sister, who, after their dog dies, attempt to dig a hole to hell to save its soul. As they venture deeper, they encounter demonic symbols, disturbing rituals, and eerie figures watching them from the woods. While no scientific evidence supports the idea that the film is actually deadly, the stories surrounding it continue to spread. Whether you believe in curses or not, one thing is certain: Antrim has cemented itself as one of the most mysterious and terrifying horror films ever made, and many refuse to risk watching it. Midnight Meat Train, 2008 Midnight Meat. Train is one of the most underrated yet intensely graphic horror films ever made. Directed by Ryohei Kitamura and based on a short story by Clive Barker, the mind behind Hellraiser, this film delivers relentless, unflinching violence that left audiences deeply disturbed. When it premiered, many viewers couldn't handle the sheen, extreme gore. Some ran out of the theater, while others cried from sheer shock and brutality. The film didn't just push boundaries, it obliterated them. Midnight Meat Train was originally mishandled by its studio, Lionsgate, which dumped it into limited release instead of giving it a proper theatrical rollout. For hardcore horror fans, Midnight Meat Train is a must-watch for its stunning visuals, relentless carnage, and unique story. But for casual viewers, it might be too much to stomach, proven by the fact that many people simply couldn't make it to the end. If you think you can handle one of the most gruesome, unrelenting horror films ever made, step aboard Midnight Meat Train. But don't be surprised if you regret watching it afterward. Say El Loud, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. If you've heard of this one, you already know this isn't just horror, it's pure depravity. Salo was banned in multiple countries because it was too disturbing. People fled screenings, unable to handle the extreme gut-wrenching horror. Some called it the most disturbing film ever made, despite, or perhaps because of, its disturbing nature. Salo is often studied in academic circles as a critique of fascism, power, and human cruelty. Pasolini, a known political filmmaker, used the film to show the absolute corruption of power, how the ruling elite can dehumanize others purely for their own pleasure. The film is loosely based on the Marquis de Sade's novel, The 120 Days of Sodom, but reimagined in fascist Italy during World War II. It follows four wealthy, sadistic men, a duke, a bishop, a magistrate, and a president, who kidnap a group of teenagers and subject them to a horrifying series of physical, psychological, and sexual tortures over the course of 4 months. Salo is not just another disturbing horror film, it's a true test of psychological endurance. Many who have seen it wish they could erase it from their memory. Even hardened horror fans find themselves deeply unsettled by its brutality, nihilism, and hopelessness. Terrifier 2 2022. Terrifier 2 is the sequel to 2016's Terrifier, featuring Art the Clown, one of the most sadistic, nightmarish horror villains in recent memory. While the first film was already notorious for its brutal, unrelenting violence, the sequel took it to an entirely new level, pushing boundaries so far that even seasoned horror fans struggled to sit through it. Director Damien Leone promised a film that would traumatize people, and he delivered. This movie shocked the world. When Terrifier 2 hit theaters, people didn't just walk out. They fainted, vomited, and even had panic attacks. EMTs were called to some screenings, and the movie's extreme gore made even hardcore horror fans run for the exits. The unrelenting, no-holds-barred gore made Terrifier 2 too much to handle for some viewers, leading to real medical emergencies in theaters. Despite, or perhaps because of the controversy, Terrifier 2 became a massive success, grossing over $15 million on a tiny $250,000 budget, a shocking achievement for an independent horror film. Terrifier 2 is not just a horror film, it's an endurance test Even horror veterans found themselves squirming in their seats, and many had to look away from the screen. So there you have it, 10 horror movies so terrifying, so gut-wrenching, and so psychologically disturbing that audiences couldn't even sit through them. Some films made people faint, others caused panic attacks, and a few even led to EMTs being called in. But now the real question is, could you make it through these films? Are you brave enough to watch Salo without looking away? Could you sit through the merciless brutality of Terrifier 2? Would you dare to test the rumored curse of Antrim? Or would you, like so many others, before you find yourself running for the exits, unable to stomach the horror unfolding on screen?